La presentación tiene el título de Proyectos de GNL en México, exportando las importaciones. El orador de esta sesión número 3 es Diego Rivera, investigador asociado senior Centro de Política Energética Global. Diego Rivera explorará las oportunidades de exportación, posicionando al país como un jugador emergente en el mercado global de GNL. Vamos a recibirlo con un fuerte aplauso.
Bueno, buenos días a todos. Good morning, everybody. It's absolutely great to be in Panama, in this beautiful country. I am actually from Mexico, but in the benefit of the audience, people that came from very far away, I'll speak in English. But I'm very happy to later on have some chats in Spanish. Myself, I'm Diego Rivera Ribota. I'm a senior research associate at the Center on Global Energy Policy. If you guys are not familiar with the Center on Global Energy Policy, we're a think tank in Columbia University in the city of New York, and we're basically a bridge between academia and policymaking. What we want to do that is to provide that hard evidence-based analysis from academia, but in the formats and the concepts that sometimes is needed, and not every time it is shared, for both for policymakers, for companies, and so on. And before I start, I do want to acknowledge and to thank Kena Bravo for organizing and putting together this event. And I want to thank her especially for inviting me. And I think there are two components of this. One is to starting and making this happen really from scratch. Only 5-6 years ago, when I had the pleasure to meet her, this was just that a good idea, and now we have this amazing event together. So that's one thing. Thank you for her. And second, I think it's very important to bring different voices, both from industry, from policymaking, from academia, and from other people in the table. And I think that's very important, to not just have the same people just talking to each other. I think that's something very important, and I appreciate, and I think that's very important. I expect that continues to be the case during the next couple of days. So with that being said, I am basically building a little bit on where Sergio left the ball before the break. And that is LNG exports and imports, and that's what we'll see, to Mexico, right? During his presentation, we heard a lot of times like Mexico this, Mexico that, imports, exports, a lot of fuss about those projects. What's really going on? And what I want to share with you is a little bit of what's going on in Mexico, what's happened in the last years, and perhaps more interesting, what can we expect for the future, right? So the way we structured this, or the way I structured that, is in the following one. So first, looking at what's happened in Mexico, how a main importer, how the largest importer of natural gas in the Americas is to become an LNG exporter, that if all the projects that are proposed materialized, which is unlikely, but if they did, that would made of Mexico the fourth largest LNG exporter, right? So that sounds a lot like a lot. But why are we talking about this? And eventually we're going to speak about some of the developments in the present that lets us or on where we can expect in the future, right? So first of all, on Mexico, what we've seen here in the last decade, essentially, it's a higher presence of the gas in Mexico's energy mix. This is primary energy. This includes, of course, everything from transportation, what our industries consume, residential consumers, commercial consumers. And what we see there clearly are two things. One, that total energy consumption really has not quite increased, right? Despite economic development, albeit not too strong, 2-3% in average, it's actually like kind of a level up. So that talks us a bit of some energy efficiency improvements there. But what we do see is that in the fuel mix, there's a higher presence of natural gas. Today, natural gas is the main source of the Mexican energy sector, right? It has surpassed oil products and crude oil. And I think that's very important. It has been mostly at the stake of what we see there as crude oil, and that responds to a decline on domestic crude production, but also less coal and a mild increase on renewables. So all in all, we have a 40% increase in natural gas in Mexico. And then where is this gas consumed? How is it consumed? As we can see very clearly, in blue, we have the power sector, electricity. The short answer is that electricity is the main driver of both demand today for natural gas in Mexico, but also of growth during the last decade. And what we've seen, there's like some interesting components too. The second sector actually is or was the industrial sector, right? Things, the most intensive ones, iron, steel, cement, but also some sorts of manufacturing. And what we've seen actually is like some ups and downs, and really in net terms, we see some declines, in fact. The third main sector actually is the oil and gas sector on its own operations. Essentially, as people familiar with the Mexican energy sector, that's a state-owned company, Pemex, Petróleos Mexicanos, which for its own operations, it is a high consumer of this fuel, and that it operates in a very not very efficient way. So that's why we have such high levels of consumption there. And I would note something that strikes and is different from people from other geographies, like of course from Canada, from the United States, but also even some Latin American nations like Argentina, where the residential sector is actually pretty small in Mexico. And that responds, yes, on one hand to things like weather, right? There's not a lot of demand for heating, of course, there's no real need for that. But also there's not quite a development of things like distribution for natural gas. There's some developments in some cities, but countrywide, that is not something that is quite developed. So we see, therefore, here that the main share, the lion's share of it, is the power sector, right? So let's zoom into the power sector. And here what we've seen is, unlike to what we saw about total primary energy supply, we have a steep increase on electricity demand. And a trend that not only has continued, but it has accelerated in the last few years. And here what we've seen is a clear switch from other sources, specifically oil, to natural gas, which is in orange, right? So we see in orange color that natural gas really ramping up. We see that decrease on red, which is essentially oil products, and other reductions in coal, to a lesser extent on hydropower, and then in the last 4 or 5 years, some important increase on solar and wind. But really, what is the backbone of the electricity and the power sector in Mexico, as we can see, and increasingly so, is natural gas. That's all very good. Where is that gas coming from? And here, it's a very clear picture. If we look at the green color, that is domestic production. And what we've seen here is a clear growth up in the 2000s, then a peak in 2010, and ever since then, we've seen a declining trend. That stabilized to a certain extent in 2021, but what we've seen today is like some stagnation and really further decreases. I think it's very hard to see this trend to go away. It would need very hefty investments, among other things. So what we see is like a steep decline in production, and we see a very clear ramp up on piped imports from the United States. That has been really the striking story of it, and we've seen like what it has taken to do that. This has made of Mexico today very dependent from these flows, right? So just to give you about 70% of natural gas consumption in Mexico is imported by the United States by pipeline, and specifically from one state, which is the state of Texas, right? And as we can see, like during a good decade or so, LNG imports were increasing up to a healthy level, and they were displaced really, especially like in late 2019 when one very long pipeline that is offshore, by the way, in the Gulf Coast, really displays the need for vast volumes of LNG. And right now it has become onto a different behavior in which it responds to seasonal and security management of the pipeline system. But what we see really is a 70% dependence on flows coming from Texas, and that represents over 60% for power generation. Now, how did that happen? With a massive expansion of infrastructure. And so I just wanted to show you how robust this network that we were talking about has become. Mexico has 24 gas pipeline interconnections with the United States. Some of them are pretty small, but others are huge. So I would attract your attention, for instance, to that pipeline that I was talking about. On your right, where it says Matamoros, that's an offshore pipeline that connects the south of Texas up to 2 points in the Gulf of Mexico. That it has a massive capacity of 2.5 BCF per day. So that's pretty high. It has some empty capacity still, and some of the projects that we'll be talking about rely on this break. So that's pretty impressive. We have other bright spots there, and what I highlighted here on is like the LNG infrastructure. So we have 4 receiving terminals at the moment that are operational. Not all of them. I mean, as I said, some of them operate with a very small factor. They are not needed as much. And then, and a striking point, and that's why I put those crosses, is that despite this increase, pretty impressive in terms of infrastructure, there are some headaches and there are lots of obstacles on some of this infrastructure. Take, for instance, the one in the northwest. That pipeline is called Guaymas El Oro in the state of Sonora in Mexico. And basically, what that one was intended to do is to bring that gas coming from Arizona, which is really coming all the way from Texas, and anchor it to two stations of combined cycle, basically to generate electricity. But what has happened is like that system has been stuck for about 5 years on a struggle with indigenous communities. And essentially, ever since that pipeline is, while finished, non-usable, right? So those gas flows are really not coming there. Thankfully for that region, there's another pipeline that does bring some volumes on that area of the country. Then this is something that, has happened in other places. Tuxpantula is an example of that, like on the east side. And then, for instance, we have the opposite on that other cross close to the city of Mazatlan, in which there we had the opposite problem. Essentially, we had a shiny, bright pipeline that not only was, like, it was finished ahead of schedule, in fact, like a few months before, but the power plant was not there. And so, you have that mismanagement, that misplanning, those problems that respond to a number of very complicated factors, but that at the end of the day, you have a lot of infrastructure that is subutilized, right? Like it's a waste of money, which in many cases, most of it comes from public money, right? So that's an interesting perspective there that allows us to do. And then perhaps the last one that also it's interesting is in Mérida, in the Yucatan Peninsula, which essentially where we have there is a lack of interconnection on the transmission sector, and you have increasing demand for power generation, specifically from natural gas fire plants. But there is only one gas pipeline that is kind of a telescope. It becomes smaller as it goes through. So what you have there is less volumes and scarcity, essentially of power. So you have a need of infrastructure there. There was floated idea a few years ago of a possible floating storm regasification unit that did not materialize. Now there's a new pipeline in construction. But essentially, the bottom line here is like there are severe areas for better management here and for enhance this infrastructure. And that has led to things like blackouts or higher prices, right? At best, high prices, at worst, blackouts. Sometimes that, of course, is more expensive. And then we see this wave of LNG projects. So in that context that we're talking about, you see like, oh my God, there are over 10 projects proposed to re-export this Texas-produced LNG for the most part. No, those are the ones in purple. We are familiar already with the ones on red, and which are the existing regasification terminals. And then we have on green the liquefaction terminals in operation. That's only one, Altamira. And there's one more that is in construction. That is Ica in the northwest of Mexico. So if we look at it, as we said, like that's quite a lot. That represents over 45 million tons per annum of capacity if developed. But in reality, how many of these projects will be developed? That's one question. But second, what are the implications of that for this Mexican system, energy system that we're talking about that has a lot of challenges already, right? And so if we look at this today, what actually is going on is essentially there's one project that is operating, Altamira, very recently, as Sergio commented before. They sent their first official cargo to Europe. There was, before that, a non-official cargo that ended up going to the west side of Mexico, and that was like all the news at the time. And then we have Ica that is meant to be operational sometime next year. It's delayed, or perhaps up to 2026. There's not a lot of clarity in there. But this is where we're standing today, really. And so there are a number of projects, as we said, that are on the permitting side that had some progress, but have not received FID yet. So we see what will happen there. And what is important to highlight is, like, as we said, where is that gas coming from? And this is coming from the state of Texas, of course. So if we look at how much does that represent for Texans, how much does that represent for U.S. production, we see actually that it's been a pretty rising trend, both between the increase on exports going to Mexico, but also those going for LNG. So as we see today, as we stand in 2023, that's the latest data, sorry, there's a typo there. It says 1905. That should be 2023. It's about 7% of total U.S. production going to Mexico. And that is mostly to serve domestic demand. If we increase that to these LNG projects, that of course will increase further. But then you have also increasing demand in the US for its own US LNG projects. And we're not considering the demand from the US power sector, which with the talk that we've been listening about AI, about data processing centers, there would maybe more demand for electricity and more for natural gas. So what we've seen today is that a conservative estimation by the EIA, the US EIA, there's going to be a 30% share of production going to exports. That's quite high. And that can have some implications, and we'll see. And that is a concern that people have approached to us at the Center on Global Energy Policy on what could be the impacts for domestic prices in the US, right? Like for having such a high or a relatively higher level of production going to exports, among other concerns, including emissions, right? And so moving ahead with this, there's a lot of these uncertainties that what's going to happen. Really, we got like a part of the equation, of course, on the Mexican side, and we got this other one on the Mexican. And really my intent and the goal of this is to highlight some of these issues and really share with you, reflect some of these issues. So on the first hand, like what are the benefits and costs for Mexico in terms of energy system and economy? In terms of the energy system, a further demand for natural gas could be in competition with domestic demand in Mexico, so for power generation, right? More infrastructure will be needed for so. And in fact, testament of that is that one of these projects actually is developing its own gas pipeline because otherwise there wouldn't be enough gas to serve both the current and the future expand on power demand, but also this liquefaction plant, right? So there's a bit of uncertainty there. We have at the same time, a new leadership in Mexico. There was an election of a new president, a new Congress, and so it's definitely fair to say that there's like increased volatility, unexpected volatility. We don't know what's going to happen, what's going to be the impact on energy policy. I'm very happy to talk and further expand on what we could expect on this later over some coffee break or drinks. But what we see is like people on the energy sector approaching them and trying to figure out what the rules of the game is really going to be during the next 6 years. So the lady on white there, you may be familiar, some of you may be familiar with her. She's the CEO of Mexico Pacific Limited, which is the leader of one of the proposal of one of these projects. And they are certainly, approaching. This happened only on Monday, for instance, right? Then we have another concern, which is Mexican energy security, really what I was talking about on what could be the impact of it. And this happened already. That's why there's a high level of concerns. In 2021, there was this big freeze in Texas that you may be familiar with it. It caused like, a bunch of hours without electricity power. But that was beyond the impacts of Texas. That expanded well into Mexico in about 15 to 16 states. And so that issue of energy security is some of concerns of Mexican policymakers because there's no guarantee that this may not be happening again, right? So that's one issue there. And this is, for example, a picture of those times. This is the city of Durango, which is not even close to the border, and it was for over 12 hours without power. And then we got higher issues, pressures in Mexico for environmental and social license of these projects. One of these projects, for instance, has been subject to increased pressure of these groups, and they sent this powerful, striking campaign that is called Ballenas o Gas, Whales or Gas, because it is developed in this part of the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of Cortez, the Cortez Sea, in which there's a very fragile ecosystem, and it can have repercussion on this aspect. And so the bottom line thing there is like there's a reason why some of these projects were not built in the west coast of the U.S. Some of you may remember Jordan Cove, what happened to it, right? Like permitting there is very complicated. So there's a lot to think that this may happen in some areas of these projects. Maybe not in Mexico, not in all of Mexico, but there are certainly some regions in which this is particularly acute, right? And so that's something that we've seen more recently in the latest months. And then we got another issue that also has been in the attention, but at the international level, but also within Mexico, which is related to the high methane emissions, specifically on the Permian Basin, right? As you guys are familiar, the Permian Basin, like the main driver for the bulk there is oil, right? Natural gas is a bit of a byproduct there. The dynamics are focused there, and the levels there of methane emissions, of venting and flaring, are pretty high. So that's something that the industry already is calling for, that policymakers are calling to, and I think that'd be some very interesting to see how develop. There has been some initiatives at the international level that have are trying to tackle this, and I think that'd be interesting to see how that develops. And then, as I mentioned, there are concerns increasingly in the United States on what would be the impacts of more U.S. gas or of more U.S. that is produced, more gas that is produced in the U.S. and how is that going overseas, right? And so we that's something that has been even at the level of the political campaign. And then we have like all this talk that, you know, as we were mentioning, like in Gastech and in every conference, like what's going to happen with global LNG demand, right? On the one hand, and what's going to happen with global LNG supply on the other. That's uncertainty. We don't have a crystal ball, but we do see some developments that have been delayed, that were maybe a little bit too optimistic, and that we see a number of liquefaction projects, particularly on the coast of the U.S., that are not going as fast as we thought, and they were not coming offline in 25, 26, and maybe they are kicked down back to 27, 28, and so on. And so, as we see, you know, often this demand is like, we're not really not sure what's going. This is from yesterday from the International Energy Agency, the latest outlook that they published, the World Energy Outlook. And basically what they say is not too much different compared to what we saw last year, except there's a little bit of an increased role for LNG in the current policy scenario. So we'll see how that happens. And then we talk also about the impact on Biden's LNG pause and how will that impact these projects in Mexico. And in fact, what we've seen is like many of these projects even have focusing or have also impacting the same issues of not having that permit. The case of Saguaro LNG, for instance, in which they will need to or to extend their permit, right? And so will that happen? Well, that will very much be a stake, and that will very much depend on what happens on the other side of the border. And if we go to that, then the other, of course, missing part of the puzzle is what's going to happen in only a few weeks in November, and what U.S. citizens are going to do when they go to the polls. And that really is going to put a heavy accent on how those U.S. flows are going to go, yes, to the LNG market, but also to be exported to Mexico. So with all of this, we have, as a matter of conclusion, we have a country that is heavily reliant on these flows for its own for its own processes, for electricity generation, that is facing its own problems in terms of infrastructure development, that requires extensively more efforts on doing so, but of which most of those projects will depend ultimately on what happens on the other side of the border. So I think this is just a very important moment to think on this Mexican-U.S. side of the election. And overall, when we're talking about global LNG projects, this is something that ultimately depends on the collaboration between politicians and policymakers on these two sides of the border, but also for companies and entrepreneurs on both sides of the border. So without further ado, that's what I wanted to share. Thank you very much, and that's it.